Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the final session, Cloud Management, Cloud Evolution, and what's next. So you've heard the previous panels take you through the cloud journey, starting with the whole cloud strategy. What do you need to buy? How do you procure it? And how do you migrate your workloads? And again, what we are going to do is focus on what comes next. What happens when you actually implement your workloads in the cloud? How do you actually operate in the cloud? Again, my name is Moses Merchant. I'm from Agilius. And we have a great panel over here for you for this event, starting with Vikas Sharma on my left. Vikas is the Chief Solutions Architect at Sevatech. Vikas, 30 seconds. What's your favorite cloud acronym or buzzword?
My favorite buzzword is transformational, and I'll explain it.
Okay, well, okay, cool. Next up over there on the far right over there is Adam Claytor. And Adam is the Chief Architect at the North America Public Sector Division of Red Hat.
Yeah, thanks.
All right,
Thanks for having me.
Your favorite buzzword, your favorite cloud story?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I've heard is when your cloud bill gets to around $100,000, your cloud salesperson never stops calling you. But when it gets to $1 million, they never call you back, right? And so it's just the idea of how do we put the control back in the consumer of cloud, right? Rather than having folks locked in. And I hope we're going to talk a lot about that and how to make sure our workloads are portable and we're smart consumers of cloud as we enter into all this.
Excellent. Finally, we have Dan Prieto. And Dan is the strategic executive from a small company called Google. They make search engines. Dan, what is the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow?
I had to Google this. 11 meters per second.
African swallow.
11.15 meters per second.
All right, your
Thank
favorite
you.
story.
I don't know if it's so much a story, but I think given the composition of much of the audience today, acquisition professionals, I think it's important to realize sort of the brave new world that we're entering. The Federal Acquisition Register, the FAR, includes the word cloud exactly 0 times. If you extend that search to the DFAR, the word cloud shows up 6 times. OMB A130, governing the strategic management of IT, which was just updated in mid to late 2016, only includes the word cloud 3 times. So, and I was at the White House at the time on the National Security Council staff. I was at DoD prior to that, and I helped, push that document out. Times, they are a-changing, and that's really the focus of the conversation today. And it's not just about understanding tech. It's about understanding the impact on business and culture of that tech. So I think that's really going to be a lot of the focus of our talk today.
All right. So, folks, we have some really smart people on the stage over here, barring myself. So then, without any further ado, let's jump into the discussion over here. Let's start with an important milestone. Some of you have already crossed it. Some of you are getting over there very soon and making your way towards it. And that's deploying your first application in the cloud. Right, so Vikas, let me start with you. You've successfully deployed your first application. No one's complaining. So in your experience, what are the important things that one should be thinking about at this stage? What do you need to do at a strategic and operational level at this stage?
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Moses. So first I'll start with admitting it's a bit of a hypothetical question because given the size and organizational structure of your agencies, there won't be one. There will be many, 2, 3, one per program office or center or service or business unit. So they'll all be going to the cloud. But this question, when the panel selected it, was intended to be a table setter for the conversation that follows. And let me start off that conversation. What we want to do, folks do a lot of stuff after they achieve. So you just got your first system, an ATO, production ATO, in your enterprise cloud environment. So a lot of stuff has already happened before you did that. But at this point, when your first ATO is granted, I would strongly urge people to use this first experience as a learning experiment and gather and leverage those lessons learned across the entire enterprise. How do we do that? We do an enterprise retrospective. You can get some Agile coaches, acquire services of some Agile coaches to help you along with that activity, but at a minimum, your group of people who are engaged in this retrospective are your system developers and owners, your mission folks, IT operations and infrastructure, and absolutely acquisitions. There are some critical lines of inquiry here, okay, as to what do we do next? So how was our experience? Okay, how long did it take? How many groups did it involve? Were there shortcomings in our system architecture and configurations that we had to overcome? Did the system meet performance requirements, not only for itself, but every upstream and downstream dependencies that the system has? Was the process of deployment automated? If we keep to our current process, how many updates and deployments can we do? Okay. What changes do we need to make in our operations? Okay, for this system. When do we know something happened to that system in production? What is our contingency plans, disaster recovery, RTO and RPO, recovery time objective and recovery point objective? How long did the ATO process take? Do we expect all following systems to follow the same process? Or are we going to somehow change it? How do we update, or do we need to update our enterprise threat model? Okay, because of this new reality of there being a cloud in our environment. What security events do we need to now monitor and address? Okay, and are you seeing the cost savings that you perhaps expected to see? Very important. And why not? Finally, we're trying to do this because we want to learn lessons to how to do this faster and cheaper. Okay. So that's a pretty significant list. And the question naturally arises, right, that why should we do this? Okay. Seems a long list, a lot of very complicated things. And for that, we have to kind of step back a bit and tell a little story, okay? Well, after all, we've been running, we've been developing systems and running infrastructures for decades now. Why do we have to suddenly, everything has to change? Okay, what's new? Okay, what happened? Okay, so to answer that, it's necessary to take a step back and kind of talk about a particular story. First of all, everybody knows, cloud's the thing right now. Okay, everybody's doing it. Everybody's going to the cloud. Cloud adoption. We had a little discussion up in the morning about cloud adoption. Cloud adoption rates are very nice. Okay. To me, the question was why. Why are people going to the cloud? Okay. So we started looking, and obviously what happened was we found out, sure, capacity and elasticity on demand and cost effectiveness was the top two reasons why people were moving to the cloud. But there were a whole bunch of other reasons, okay, and why they were moving. So, and then other thing that caught my attention was certain leadership in industry that understood the cloud platform to be that innovation, that transformational technology that allows them to change their organizations, to finally transform their organizations into what they always wanted. What do you folks want is nothing different from what those guys want. More organizational responsiveness to the mission, more business agility, okay? And the stories are no different out in industry or in government. Everybody is really looking for that responsiveness in the organization and the business agility. And so that was a big reason for why they finally recognized cloud as that enabling technology. Now, but what is the cloud? Is something new? Okay, do we get overwhelmed about it? For me, as a person who's been dealing with the cloud for a while, I know most of the base technologies within the cloud exist in your enterprise right now. Virtualization, containers, all that stuff, disks, block storage, object storage, everything, every base technology that exists in the cloud exists in your enterprise right now. So what's new? Okay, well, what the cloud really did was put that in a really smart new package. So if the internet gave us the global communication infrastructure, think of the cloud as giving you the global compute infrastructure to go along with it. And all of that, just you get to go to a website, present your credit card, and use every one of these great ideas in computing that we have put together in that package. That's new. Okay, how we deliver these compute services back to the end users, that's new. Okay, and what really this enabled was almost transformational. CEOs and leadership out in industry have completely revamped their business models. They have created entirely new business models. And they have brought about more than anything else, the kind of transformation they were looking for. And so that's why you have to learn the lessons, because the package uses the same base technologies in a slightly different way to enable cloud paradigms like elasticity on demand and capacity on demand, time sharing for your cost effectiveness, and pay as you go. So it doesn't make much sense for anybody to go adopt what is, yes, a new package, awesome package of old technology, and then go about doing the stuff the way we've been doing all along. Can't take your old infrastructures and the way you develop systems and all that stuff out. So that's why we have to learn the lessons. That's why we do enterprise retrospectives. We learn how to change all the processes from development to deployment to operations to security to that's the first step that I would recommend the organizations take. Thank you.
Transformation, that's the key word over there, right? Because very good, very good. And
that was my buzzword, transformation.
Transformation. And when you talk about transformation, I'm sure people have heard about building things faster, cheaper, better. You know, there's the old joke about pick two of the three. I think with the cloud, you can get all three, right? Faster, cheaper, better. Is there anything that's different when you move to the cloud? You know, from moving from a physical infrastructure or from like on-prem to the cloud. When if you've just finished your migration, you come in the next day. Are there things which are going to be the same also? We spoke about some differences. Are there things that are going to be the same? And does anybody else on the panel have any opinion about that?
Thanks. So I think we need to take a little bit of a step back and just think about when we begin to talk about cloud, what aspect of cloud are we really talking about? So there's infrastructure as a service, which I think is really the classic design of, I have a virtual machine or a physical machine within my data center. I want someone else to take on the O&M for ping, power, and pipe, and I just want to move that out to someone else's data center. But there are other models that I think we're going to talk about later on, like platform as a service, function as a service, and finally software as a service. And I think by and large, the consumption characteristics I've seen throughout the federal government have been focused on the two extremes of that spectrum, right? How many folks in the room are using some sort of software as a service for their email? You've got O365 or a Gmail, right? So that for a lot of organizations, that was actually the first foray into the cloud. And now we're looking at some of these lift and shift type of models, right? I want to move out of my data center into someone else's data center. So I drop that O&M for ping, power, and pipe. I'm no longer in the real estate business, which these are all really intelligent sort of decisions for a CIO to be making. But many times that's kind of closely aligned to more of a managed services contract, right? If I haven't refactored my application to exist in that cloud, I'm really just entering into a managed services agreement with a cloud provider and then obligating myself to pay by the minute, by the hour for that service as I do that. So I think we need to carefully examine the cost benefits of making these decisions. Oftentimes that movement and that lift and shift is quite valuable. And so we do that to stem some of that short-term hemorrhaging of cash, right? And so, but if it is more valuable, in fact, for us to enter into a traditional managed services agreement, I wouldn't necessarily be afraid of doing that. So I think you have to look at what level you're really looking to attack and what the goal of the organization actually is beyond moving to cloud, which I think has been a big driver.
I want to pick up on that and also pick up on Vikas's comments. Once you get your toe in the water on cloud, I think it's important not to focus on the technical aspects of it, but as some of the other panels before us have said, focus on sort of the business implications of it. Because if you ask that question, why am I doing this cloud project and what benefits is it having, it will tell you whether you are taking full advantage of what the cloud can offer or not. Am I doing a cloud project simply to save costs? Perfectly valid reason. There's been a push for many years to sort of improve cost management in government, obviously. But that is sort of the most basic proposition of the cloud. You could go further and say, well, am I actually getting significant performance improvement? That is a more mature and strategic view. You could go further and say, is it transforming my approach to security? Because I am now no longer responsible for what I've moved to the cloud for the patch management or the life cycle management, and that's now up to the CSP. That is another consideration. And the final, most strategic consideration is my cloud project and my view of how I'm going to use cloud, does it actually help me modernize? Does it actually help me innovate? Right? And those are different value propositions from cloud. In my view, the big push to cloud that we are in right now actually has a very specific point in time impetus. I think the focus on cloud, in my view, from when I was at the White House, stems, to be frank, from the aftermath of the OPM breach. That is the first time that all of these formerly separate conversations, cost reduction, security, and modernization, those had been long trends, but they had tended to be treated separately. OPM brought all of those together, and OPM said, well, wait a minute, you can attack, kill each of these birds with a stone, and that stone is either shared services or cloud. So the big push to say it's okay to outsource key functions around IT happened under the tail end of the Obama administration. We focused on shared services and cloud. This administration has actually picked up the ball and been pretty continuous and has shifted more and more to cloud on balance, even more so than shared services. So once you dip your toe in the water, step back and say, how is this project setting us forth on a journey to take full advantage of what cloud can offer over time?
Thank you. Let me start diving in a little bit deeper into some of the areas that we just touched on. Let's start talking talking a little bit about cloud management, managing your environment in the cloud. So, Adam, what are some of the key differences in managing a cloud environment versus a traditional environment?
Absolutely. So I spoke a little bit about sort of the ongoing O&M costs, whether that be in your data center or whether that be in a cloud environment. And so the reality is, if as the CIO we decide to buy some technology and it costs us $100,000, but there's $1 million on the back end of man hours and operational cost in seeing that technology to fruition, that's a pretty significant cost overall. And so we need to make evaluations about, should we be buying this as a service rather than really trying to build this technology on our own or building this upon an infrastructure stack where we have to be responsible for all of that management. And then I think Maria actually did a really nice job in the last session of illustrating the value of monitoring and having an understanding of all the things that you're deploying. So she said when she first got there, they couldn't tell her what was on the network, what was the top 5 consumers of network traffic. They couldn't even begin to put their finger on that. But now she has capability in her cloud environment to have that chargeback and showback of resource utilization and say, oh, we need to turn this off. We need to turn the lights off when we're done building or using a particular workload, because the potential for run-up of those costs is quite dramatic. And so what I would say is that, yes, management and management tools are a critical component of being successful in the cloud, but I think the tenet that we have to really take with us is that it's automation of that management. If we have human capital individuals managing resources directly within our cloud environment, it's an incredibly expensive way to do that, right? So if you have a human deploying a server in a cloud and it takes them an hour to execute on that task, and that would really be great, right? If one individual could do that in an hour, that's a task that could be automated to happen within seconds or even minutes. And that's a fully secured implementation of that infrastructure. So I really think that automation of a lot of these tasks, the security evaluations, the implementations, the deployment of our technologies as we look to move into cloud, that's really the tool that needs to be, in my opinion, one of the biggest parts of that. I think the good news is that learning the skills and the practices of automation are something that you can do sort of within your own data center, right? You can begin to automate within your existing infrastructure and really not make a huge expenditure in the cloud in learning how to automate the cloud. What I would say is that, kind of use that as an opportunity to get your internal house in order and begin to automate those workloads internally and then automate their deployment to that cloud. I believe that once we've executed on that automation into a cloud, we begin to figure out how we're going to automate ourselves out of that cloud. And so, in the next generation of cloud consumption, the portability of workloads is going to become really important. If in fact we're able to capitalize on spot market opportunities within the cloud marketplace, our ability to move those workloads between the clouds is going to be the only way that we can realize those financial opportunities. Yeah, so I think the vendor community has been pretty adept at cloud enabling. I think we're getting much closer to actually cloud enabled tools than maybe we were a few years ago, when I think the focus was really on cloud washing, right? Which was just, hey, look, we've added cloud to the name of this and now you can use it in the cloud and it's going to help. And so yes, I would say that there's a lot of maturity in the tool sets today, but there are also going to be new tools that you're going to seek out and that you're going to use, a lot of those tools are really going to be cloud native. You're not going to necessarily want to deploy a complex monitoring system into your cloud in order to get a lot of the information. You're going to use some sort of subscription software as a service monitoring tool and then consolidate that. But I think one of the rather daunting tasks of CIO is certainly going to be, how do I integrate the things that are in the cloud that I'm buying today with the technologies that are still within my data center? There was some discussion earlier today on what workloads are or are not appropriate for a cloud. And for certain agencies, there are workloads that may not ever move to a cloud. I think those expectations are constantly evolving. So the workload we might not move today, we may be looking to move a year, 2, 5 from now. But in the meantime, that integration of exposing the business value that is available in the cloud to whether that be our internal data or even our internal applications is certainly one of the tasks that our CIOs are going to be responsible for moving forward.
Excellent. Thank you. One other concept that I keep hearing about when, for cloud management, and that's pets versus cattle, which to me is like very interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What does that mean, pets versus cattle?
Yeah. Has anyone else heard that term? I apologize. So the idea is that if we have a server in our data center, it's really, really important, right? We know exactly what the workload is that's running on that server all the time. And in fact, we name these servers. They may have creative names. When I started out at the Patent and Trademark Office nearly 20 years ago, we named all of our servers after dead rock stars. Like, that was our server naming standard. And they were really our pets. And someone would say, hey, Lennon just went down, and McCartney's not able to this or that. And so that was a real part of how we managed our infrastructure. And we knew the version of the operating system and the patch level, and we knew all these things about these servers. And we really treated them like pets. But in the cloud environment, we don't do that. We don't do that at all. And the idea is that if you've got a herd of animals and one gets sick, you don't necessarily take it to the vet to get it fixed, right? You may just cycle it out of your production system, and you'll bring in another cow or mule or what have you to sort of fulfill that spot. And so rather than sort of making that investment on an individual basis for each individual server and really taking care of them, we really just have this idea that we can build a brand new server with this capability instantaneously in the cloud. And I think that really speaks to the automation story as well, is that as we automate that, we're able to guarantee consistency across all of those servers. So hopefully, without too much of the gore, I illustrated a bit. And I realize Paul McCartney's not dead. There's some debate on that. There has been. Some of you remember. But he's not dead. He just released a new album, actually.
Very good. Well, let's come back to automation and more specifically DevOps. Who on the panel would like to define DevOps for me?
So, DevOps is not a complicated definition in my mind. It's best defined as a culture of collaboration between your developers and your IT operations and all operations teams to deliver effectively on the mission. When do we start thinking about DevOps? My suggestion is before you go to the cloud. Because if you're going to define DevOps in the name of collaboration between teams, I mean, who doesn't want that? Okay, right? So start thinking about it before you go to the cloud. Also, I do not know any way to do cloud effectively without Agile and DevOps. I can do cloud without those things, yes, just not effectively. So what does this, and what is automation in context of DevOps? So I tend to think of automation as the implementation of that before mentioned collaboration. I mean, you can ask the question, okay, so what kind of, what form does this collaboration take? Do we talk a lot among each other? We already do that. No, we write automation software to automate stuff. We want to do two things. We want to, in our DevOps implementations, we want to automate our software engineering lifecycle as much as possible to actually develop the systems. And we call those CI/CD pipelines. And there was a continuous
CI/CD stands for?
Continuous integration and continuous delivery pipelines. Okay, that's typically the, and all the code that goes and enables that automation within it. The continuous integration pipeline is an integration engine that integrates all of your development processes, enables automated testing, and the continuous delivery pipeline, which lots of software for is written by the ops folks, or traditionally what were the ops folks, is about continuously delivering software to your environment. So when we operate in the cloud, we tend to think of delivering software not in 3-month increments or whatever, and that big deployment and everybody stays up at night and all that stuff. No, we do it every day. Our code goes from our development environment, goes through all the testing, passes all the security checks, and it's delivered to the cloud. We don't want big bang modernization efforts. I like to think of it, we are modernizing every day. Just a small bit, but yes, modernizing every day. So what do we have to do to enable this? Okay, so I told you about the continuous integration pipelines, but when we write automation for deployments, what we are doing is we have to, let's look at the steps in the deployment process. We have to provision compute, your networks, your storages, certain security stuff on that, and enterprise services like logging and monitoring. And then, of course, there comes the part about updates and patch management. Okay, you keep on putting patches on it. So we write code for it. We don't do it manually. So it's written in automation so that none of these instances that we are deploying, virtual machines that we are deploying, and applications we are deploying, we are handcrafting, lovingly handcrafting them. No, it's part of an automation pipeline that gets it done. That's the automation. And the goal in my mind of automation is to take our workforce from what is considered lower level activities to higher value activities in your operations. So I don't have to spend hours and hours taking a disk with me or whatever mechanism we had of updating my servers. I'd rather be doing something else of a higher value. And I'd let my automation engine handle the updates and the configurations and the provisioning. So when we build that automation, developers, operations, infrastructure folks, security folks, why do we need this collaboration? Back in the day, somebody asked me, why do you define it as collaboration? And what I did at that time, I was stumped, but I went and asked, give me your top 5 or 7 concerns that you're managing. I asked that to the development team. I asked them from operations, infrastructure, and security. The lists I got back from these diverse groups is completely orthogonally different. They are managing different concerns. And of course, that's why we had different groups. But now, since we have to enable this fast, continuous delivery of software we have to develop a mechanism to do this better. And automation is their answer. Okay. So that's my definition.
I'll piggyback on that and also introduce the concept of no ops or serverless. And this speaks to, again, what the cloud can enable. Basically, Google and the other cloud providers as well are increasingly offering cloud offerings where you really don't have to worry about the infrastructure or updating the infrastructure or writing code to automate patch management, lifecycle management, all of the above. That is all handled in the background by the cloud service provider. And that is particularly valuable for use cases like application development, working in databases, and analytics, because it allows, for example, an app developer to just code. And when they need more capacity, it automatically spins up, and the environment has the tools to allow them to just focus on the coding. Similarly, on analytics, a lot of cases, in our instances, a lot of automated machine learning, for example, allows automation of labeling of data so that you can just focus on what the data is telling you, for example, to improve a business process. The analytics folks, the application developers don't have to worry about all the things in the background. And in that case, neither do the operations IT people inside the enterprise. You have the opportunity to outsource that provisioning, that configuration, that patch management, that lifecycle management to the cloud service provider. And with that, actually, I want to pivot, because I know this is one of our questions. Are you okay if I pivot to security?
Go ahead, yes.
In those instances where you increasingly rely on the CSP for more of the functions, configuration, patch management, lifecycle management, there is an increasing opportunity with cloud providers to really figure out what your security model is. Do you take your old security model from your legacy environment and replicate that in the cloud environment? That is more likely to happen if you simply replicate your data center, you lift and shift it. I have the same number of servers, but I'm still responsible for managing all the security. There is more value add potentially in saying, you know what, I need to come up with a strategy where I rely increasingly on the CSP for security. Now, this is an interesting point because one of the largest impediments to cloud migration continues to be concepts about, is the cloud provider secure? In Google's example, I'll give you the following. We provide a public cloud. The cloud that you will be running on with Google is exactly the same global infrastructure that YouTube runs on, that Gmail runs on, that search runs on. And so the question is, actually the proposition is that Google's interests are completely aligned with yours in terms of the network and cloud services being performant and available. Our ability to deliver a YouTube video in, South America, any time of day, any time of night, in under 1/10 of a second. Our global infrastructure provides that. We discovered some of the biggest recent security flaws because we have security researchers in the last 3 years. We've put $30 billion into our own infrastructure. In 2016, Amazon, Microsoft, and us combined put $30 billion into our infrastructure. So we're constantly investing. So that relieves the burden of investing from you. And it relieves a lot of the sort of blocking and tackling security functions. Yes, I know my patches aren't updated, but I haven't got around to it, so I'll be okay with an unpatched system for about 6 months. The benefit of relying on the CSP is that they are constantly upgrading the infrastructure and the patches and updating the environment. Similarly, OMBA 130 requires strong identity, multi-factor authentication, at-rest and in-transit encryption. There is a long history of challenged projects in government of trying to implement multi-factor authentication, trying to implement encryption in-house. You're now in an environment where you don't have to run those kinds of projects because what you move to the cloud is natively encrypted. What you move to the cloud automatically has patch management. So really, I go back again to the FAR. Section 7 of the FAR says that when you write acquisition proposals, you have to think about the benefits to government of what you are acquiring. The role of the acquisition community is as a full and equal player in an environment with the CIO, with the CFO, with the secretary. You guys play an equal role in enterprise risk management. And if you think about that as your mission, not as learning about all the technology of cloud, but what role can the acquisition community play in enterprise risk management? What can I do to inject more innovation? What can I do to buy down or obsolete technology that is expensive to maintain and hard to secure? When you think about risk management, don't just think about risk management of the acquisition process. think about risk management to the enterprise, the agency, the department that you are part of, and how using acquisition and procurement to get cloud services can improve your risk management posture. That's the right way to think about the role of acquisition in here, because it is a multi-stakeholder sport. Everyone has the same objectives. You can no longer put IT and business in silos, or acquisition and IT in silos. You're all part of trying to buy down expensive and hard to secure legacy environments and move it to something that is more nimble, more agile, more cost effective, and more secure.
How do FedRAMP guidelines play a role?
So,
Play a role in the...
yeah. So the FedRAMP guidelines were obviously established with a view to making the process of thinking about security around cloud providers more agile and more efficient. The FedRAMP office over time has made a lot of improvements. I mean, there's still things it can do to improve, but I think the important thing to do is to look at the FedRAMP requirements. On the one hand, it's a compliance regime. On the other hand, it does provide actual security. But for the acquisition community, I would say this: get familiar with the FedRAMP controls, understand what they are trying to achieve from a security perspective. I think I've seen instances where acquisition professionals sort of put on the contract dozens, scores, hundreds of pages of additional security appendices. That isn't necessary. I think you have to build up a level of knowledge and trust about what FedRAMP brings you from a security perspective. Try not to bring a bunch of additional requirements on top of it, because that basically defeats the time to market, time to efficiency benefits of cloud. And also think about, if you are going to bring anything agency specific, is it really achieving something from a security perspective? We've seen this in a number of cloud RFPs lately, where there, over and above FedRAMP, there are additional location specific requirements. Think that through. Just because something is located in the United States doesn't necessarily mean it buys you more security. It buys you security in an old version of sort of physical space and physical borders, but that's an outdated view of security. If you have strong multi-factor authentication, if you have a zero trust network, like the network that Google provides, if you have strong encryption, the guidance in many cases actually is if your data is encrypted and somebody didn't steal the keys and you lose the data, you didn't actually have a breach. So in that situation, ask yourself, what does location-specific requirement buy me, or am I really have an outmoded view of security? Where I can increasingly rely on the CSP for the security, or rely on encryption, or rely on strong identity, and not just rely on traditional perimeter views of security.
Excellent, thanks. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about agencies that are further along in their cloud journey. Adam, question for you. Should agencies institute a cloud center of excellence to focus on things like governance, standardization, ongoing training, education programs?
It is. This one's on. All right. Thank you. So establishing a cloud center of excellence, absolutely. I mean, I think there's no reason not to. I think the guidance that I would give is that we should start small. We should start with an application that's far away from our data, something where we can iterate quickly and really learn what these things really mean, to consume cloud, to implement DevOps, what an ATO looks like, what the security process really is. Because I think every organization, every application, every cloud implementation is going to be incredibly different. And I think that there's just a ton that can be learned by going through the process, whether you take a OODA type of approach or what have you. There's a variety of ways that you can execute on something, observe, make some decisions, and then reiterate through your activity. So yes to all of those things. You know, I think the other thing that I would think about, especially from an acquisition perspective, is try to buy as many large components of this as you have. as are available in the marketplace, right? So, you know, if we think about the Postal Service, they have a pretty unique mission, right? They are really responsible for that last mile of delivery, and they have some pretty unique things that they do in order to do that. There are post offices in every small town, and they have these really funky but iconic right-hand drive vehicles that are all over the place delivering mail. And those are pretty unique, at least in the North America marketplace, to the post office. Not a lot of folks out there are buying a vehicle that they can't take through a drive-through, for example. But the post office made an interesting decision. They had a unique requirement. They are a government agency. They needed something that really wasn't available in the marketplace otherwise. And they did not go into automotive manufacturing. And I find that astounding because I think a lot of IT organizations within the government today are in a very similar state. They have some unique requirements. They have some security standards. They are the government. And they're in many ways going into the process of manufacturing technology. But instead, the Postal Service found that they could buy this in the marketplace. They might need some specialized, and they are iconic. We all are aware of these right-hand drive vehicles. They're in our society, and they're really the only ones that are using them. But rather than build a manufacturing facility for them, they were able to buy that from industry. And so I think we need to be very critical about the way that we go about these acquisitions, that we don't need to build our own technology over and over and over again, because I think ultimately what happens is it makes a lot of sense sometimes for a single agency to do that. There are really some very specific environmental requirements where you need to build your own technology. But what we're seeing is in the aggregate across all of government, when this begins to happen, I think it becomes a bit of waste. Not in the capital W, I'm going to call somebody an alert, an IG, but in the, hey, is that a really good effort? Are we wasting effort? And as we talk about DevOps, DevOps is about delivering frequently and the elimination of waste. That's really where the Kaizen part of DevOps comes in to this lean capability. So I would just say think critically about that. Should we be building technology or should we be buying technology? A130 would also argue that you should buy.
On that last point, the OMB A130 revision in 2016 is very clear on that front. When you are making IT investments or doing new IT projects, you need to thoroughly determine whether the same capability is out there commercially. And if it is, exactly to your point with Postal, you should not be out there trying to build, own, and operate it yourself. And cloud, you know, even though OMB A130 only has the word cloud 3 times, you know, cloud is constantly evolving. Really dramatically, the capabilities have increased just over the last couple of years. And so that clause inside A130 is really at the forefront when you think about cloud services versus trying to continue to sort of roll your own IT.
So on that topic, what are your thoughts about agencies sharing best practices and lessons learned?
Well, first of all, what we are seeing across the engagements that we are that we learn lessons from is that the agencies that are ahead are actually ahead in about 4 axes. Okay, their Agile practices, their DevOps and automation practices, cloud management and delivery, and cloud governance and security. That these 4 axes is where they have gone, or they have taken significant steps to increase their capabilities. So that's where the axis of maturity is for the various agencies who are slightly ahead. Should they share? Yes, but I am a little hesitant to say that. I say that because that is a good goal, and you can definitely leverage lessons learned at other agencies. However, agency missions are very typical. Their organization is very typical. The way they deliver IT is very typical. Lots of things are very different. Point solutions don't really carry over. Good ideas will always carry over, but not point solutions. Okay, so it has to be thought through. If there's going to be a formal exchange mechanism to be set up, how does this operate? What is the level at which it operates, and what is the kind of stuff that we do share? So I think there will be some need for that. Agencies that are ahead are also ahead in acquisition practices. They have learned their lessons of what are the intricacies of operating in the cloud that has bearing on cost and how they acquire resources. It is not just about acquiring resources also. It is also, they are ahead in terms of how they deliver to the end users, to your mission. So we got this great package now, great new package. We acquired it, and how do we deliver it to our end users and mission? So looking at that, those mechanisms also, certain organizations have made progress. I have in my mind a sort of a evolutionary path that I personally have seen agencies go through in terms of delivering there to the user. And because if we don't make it easy for mission to consume these resources that we are acquiring, your adoption rates are going to suffer. People will do their own thing. They have to deliver on the mission. They will do their own thing. One-offs will start coming up. Whatever we have to do to deliver on the mission will happen. Credit card purchases get done. Lots of other things happen. But as we make it easier, we impose the governance and the security policies that the enterprise would require, and how we deliver that without being a barrier to agility that system owners would like to see in their teams, that is the maturity that, and good ideas will always transfer. I have witnessed and listened to some ex-public servants who are doing exactly that. That exchange happens at the highest levels as well as to the operational levels. So it is happening. If I'm not quite sure if the question was to set up a formal mechanism to do it, I haven't thought about that, whether there's a formal mechanism, but informally it is happening.
Right, I'm just going to pause over here real quick and see if anyone in the audience has questions at this stage.
Yeah, this is the question for the panel. Security is a shared responsibility, more so with the evolution of the cloud or the proliferation of cloud within the federal government. Now, one of the challenges that we have is as we try to bring the solutions quicker to the user communities, we are faced with a shared responsibility of securing information assets. In a cloud platform, where you have different service providers providing different capabilities, for example, infrastructure as a service, a platform as a service, a software as a service, and then you have the user communities. Do you have any suggestions for that can be leveraged to help the system owners and the administrators move faster to get an authorization to operate?
So there were two questions rolled up in there. I think one is security strategy, which we've addressed a little bit. I think it would be a mistake if you move to the cloud to just say, look, I'm going to keep all my old security stuff and just try to lift and shift my security over to the cloud. You are not gaining scale and the efficiencies and the effectiveness of sort of capital expenditures and technical capabilities of the cloud providers. In terms of ATOs, that's a separate question. Again, FedRAMP and the provisional ATOs were meant to speed the issuance of ATOs by the agencies and departments themselves, and the overall push has been an attempt to sort of increase ATO reciprocity. Oh, they have an ATO, I'll just sort of borrow theirs because they're using the same cloud provider or the same service, and I'll accelerate. When I was still in government, and I left in January 2017, we still hadn't reached that ideal state. You still had a lot of CIOs saying, yeah, I know what's going on with FedRAMP, but I'm going to redo some of the evaluations on my own just so I can sort of convince myself and trust it. Similarly, we've had meetings with some component CIOs at certain departments where there is a tension between the CIO and some of the traditional, their IT staff, which is at some point you just have to trust that they're FedRAMPed and not try to ladle on top of it a bunch of additional security requirements because that's the way you're used to doing it, or because that makes you comfortable, or because that gives you a level of visibility that you think you need. So this, more than anything, is a culture change than a security issue. I do think, though, it is important for anyone in the audience here to increasingly understand the capabilities that the CSPs provide and to build that into your strategies. Google, for example, on both its productivity suite and its sort of infrastructure platform and platform as a service, GCP, Google Cloud Platform, there are really robust dashboards and visualizations that show you who accessed your data when, that give you rheostatic control over who can access data and when. Again, there are security capabilities built into our cloud fabric from end to end. Hardware root of trust, zero trust network, not a perimeter model. Basically, I authenticate the user, I authenticate the machine, and I authenticate the purpose every time they're accessing a piece of data. End-to-end native encryption. Options on key management. Do we manage the keys or do you? And again, these visualization dashboards to give you status at any moment. Who's pinging my data? Where's the inbound IP? What's the outbound IP? And then encryption. Again, in many of these cases, and even according to sort of a lot of state laws and NIST standards, if your stuff is fully encrypted, when you lose it, you do not have a breach. So really, if you can focus on that and not spend all your time on what people call hygiene, I have to do the patch management myself. I need, it really dramatically and strategically changes your security posture.
Any other questions? Okay, I have a couple of interesting questions over here. So I'd like to hear from all of you on the panel. Okay, really quickly, what are some of the real-life challenges of working in the cloud, right? Are there any brick walls that you expect agencies to bump into at a certain point in their journey? And how can they prepare for that?
Yeah, I think the two that I see most frequently are certainly culture and cost. There's Maria mentioned the need to turn the lights off when you're done, or to shut down workloads. And so the traditional workloads that we have in our data center today are not really optimized for working in a cloud environment by and large, right? Just generally they're not well suited. So I think you have to be intentional about how you, whether it's a refactor or adapting that application to work in a cloud environment where you do have that horizontal scalability. Because if you're, sort of the standard implementation in a data center has always been N+1. How much do I need? Add one more. If one fails, then I'm good to continue operating. Forklifting that model into a cloud provider is incredibly expensive and is really not the way that's designed to work. So I think that's really the intersection of cost and culture. We have this idea that we need more than we're going to use, and then by virtue we use more than we need. And so it's really focusing on that application and determining that horizontal scalability. And then I think long term, as I mentioned, once you have a workload that you're able to scale horizontally and decouple from a very specific cloud implementation, you as the consumer get to have a lot of choice about where that workload lives. Who is going to be your cloud provider today? If it's a nickel a CPU minute, then go over there. But if you get it for 4 cents, let's have the ability to move our workloads. And so today, one last thing that I'll say, and I know we're running short on time, is that when you flip on a light switch, you don't think about where that power is coming from, whether it's hydro or solar or even coal or nuclear. And when you go and buy a television, you don't think about where that's coming from. But today, as an IT organization, when you go to build a piece of functionality, you're doing a lot of thinking about where that compute and how that compute is going to be surfaced to you. And so ideally, we get to a point where that's no longer a stumbling block.
Dan, because do you have anything to add over there? I do want to get to one final question over here.
Just, again, cost and the huge culture change from one of CapEx and a long tail of O&M that eats up 75% of your IT budget. Cloud is a completely different cost model. And so to have it work inside the business, it requires close collaboration between IT professionals, CFO's office, acquisition professionals. I mean, this is a huge change in how you think about budgeting, how you think about dollars, how you think about cost controls. And so it's important for acquisition officials to move to a period, again, where they're looking at risk to the enterprise, not so much risk of the IT project. I think some of the other barriers, you know, you look at the commercials, everything is like, everything goes to cloud. The reality is, for a long time, you will end up being a hybrid multi-cloud enterprise. Not everything is going to shift to cloud. You will have some stuff on-prem. You'll have some stuff in the cloud. And to be honest, for resilience and performance issues, you will want multiple cloud vendors. There is a maturity level, an awareness level that comes from managing a hybrid environment, right? So yes, that is a new kind of expertise that needs to be developed to manage a hybrid multi-cloud environment in a way that is optimal for you. I do think, however, net, it dramatically increases costs, certainly on the CapEx and O&M side, and it dramatically reduces risk to the enterprise. But that is a place where you need to invest. The other thing is that to take full advantage of the cloud environment, you often have to refactor data and applications. Sometimes, again, you need to spend a penny to save a nickel. So that also raises questions, and you know, things like the new IT modernization fund are out there to try to help transition people across that transom. But those are some of the things I think that are important.
Continue on, final thoughts, we're out of time. So just, you know, what is next in the cloud evolution cycle? What are some new technologies that we should be getting excited about? What does the future hold?
Right. So it's a truism that by the time you're done setting up your enterprise cloud environments, the state of the art, as far as the vendors are concerned, has already gone ahead. But what's next for cloud? What is Cloud 2.0 in government? Generally, we see a certain state of the art across agencies, and obviously the question, what next, is what next for you folks? Okay. In my mind, operationally speaking, Cloud 2.0 in government is simply a self-aware, self-healing, autonomous environment with an eye towards manageability, security, and cost transparency. It has certain features, self-service. We would like our end users to just go up to a portal and acquire the services they need. Automated deployments, automated onboarding, ITSM integration. We want our IT service managed integrated into our cloud platforms. Serverless microservices, no ops, cloud native mission critical systems. Okay, serverless management services, the cloud management services. Security as a service with active defense. We want to be proactive with our defense, not react to events that happen, security events that happen. Okay. Automated governance and policy enforcement. We would like that to be automated. Okay. And we want a full environment monitoring with a machine learning and AI-based response to those events that happen in the other environment. So this is where you start putting in more intelligence into your environment itself, your operating environment itself. So these are some of the features that I see coming. These are some of the technology. When we were dreaming about this a few years back, the base technologies, it was a long shot because the base technologies did not exist. But every one of these things is in one form or the other is available in the market, and it's a matter of crafting a solution to bring it to government.
All right, 30 seconds, Dan. 30 seconds to Adam.
So I think Vikas made a really good point, and that is that there really is no end state in technology, right? And so I think that as we enter into these acquisitions, we have to be very aware that change is on the horizon. Change is coming very, very quickly. We need to think very differently about how the time frames and the methods in which we're making these acquisitions. And the reality is that success will not be defined by the technology acquisition that we make. It'll be defined by how well we prepare ourselves for that change that is imminent.
Last comment. I think we have to move from the idea that the cloud is simply move my data center to somebody else owning it. That is not the promise of cloud. The promise of cloud, in my view, is further up the value chain, as Vika said. For example, analytics. It is true that inside government enterprises, there is an enormous amount of trapped data about programs, about customers, about enterprise performance, that all, in my view, if unlocked properly, using really inexpensive compute power, analytics, machine learning, and AI, has the ability, really, back to the transformation beginning, transform how government does its business. But you will not get there if you put a glass ceiling on yourself and say, well, all I'm doing is lifting and shifting my data center. No, the reality is to use these continually evolving capabilities to get much better insight into how to run your enterprise, run your department, run your agency, and better serve citizens. That, to me, is the promise of cloud. Doing that inexpensively without having to buy your own servers, buy your own licenses, manage your own environment. Let somebody else do all the blocking and tackling. You focus on your mission, and you focus on doing your mission better.
Excellent. Well, that concludes our session. I would like to thank our esteemed panel. Thank you all for coming, and have a wonderful rest of the afternoon.